He came for dinner, but found a woman standing barefoot inside a meat freezer, her violet skin glowing under white lights and a digital price tag hanging from her neck. The label said, "Non-sentient." The moment he saw her blink, he knew the world was lying. The air inside Coldmart was so clean it felt unnatural. Every sound was softened by layers of automation. Footsteps cushioned, music perfectly neutral, even the scent of food filtered into something sterile. Orin Vale moved through the aisles like a man half asleep, scanning labels with the same precision he'd learned in the military. He wasn't there to shop for pleasure. He never was. Dinner was a checkbox, not a ritual. He stopped at the meat section. Transparent glass, rotating trays, digital displays describing the origin of every slice. Everything about it screamed control, predictability, safety. And then something broke that rhythm. Behind the glass stood a woman, barefoot, skin the color of dawn-lit metal, hair damp and iridescent. A soft blue light pulsed from a tag pressed against her collarbone. It read, "Biodisplay non-sentient." Her eyes, however, told a different story. They moved, not randomly, deliberately. They were watching him. Orin blinked once, unsure if it was some elaborate marketing gimmick. But the way she breathed, small, visible puffs in the cold, told him she was no prop. A clerk nearby smiled mechanically. Beautiful realism, isn't it? We're demonstrating alien musculature for culinary education. Completely compliant, sir, Orin's jaw tightened. She just looked at me. Of course she did. Behavioral realism protocols, very lifelike. He stepped closer, voice low. "She's alive." The clerk's smile trembled. "Sir, please, don't raise your voice. You'll confuse the sensors." That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a cover-up. Someone had rewritten the rules of ownership and called it progress. Orin tapped his ident chip against the purchase pad. "Sell her to me." The clerk froze. "Sir, she's not. I'm invoking the misclassification clause." His voice cut like a blade. "Now," the system beeped. Transaction complete. For one heartbeat, silence ruled the store. No alarms, no guards. Just him, the cold glass. And a woman blinking, like she couldn't believe what had just happened. When Orin lifted the barrier and wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders, she whispered one word through numb lips. Why? He didn't have an answer yet. All he knew was that he'd crossed a line, and for the first time in years, it felt right. The doors of Coldmart slid open with a quiet hiss, spilling them into the damp night. Outside, the air didn't smell of chemicals or precision. It smelled real, wet asphalt, distant oil smoke, and the faint spice of street food. Lyra shivered beside him, her bare feet touching ground that was finally imperfect. Orin draped his coat tighter around her shoulders. She flinched at the warmth, as if she'd forgotten what heat felt like. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city around them kept moving, hovercars humming above, people passing without noticing that something extraordinary had just walked out of aisle 7. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "You paid to erase a lie." He looked at her, confused. "What lie?" "That I'm not alive." She stared at the glowing lights ahead. "You paid more than you think." Orin guided her toward the transit stop. "You need a place to rest, somewhere off-grid." She followed but glanced over her shoulder. Drones hovered in the distance, blinking red dots in the mist. He noticed, too. The store hadn't sounded an alarm, but that didn't mean it wasn't watching. Inside the transit pod, he tapped coordinates to a neutral district. As the pod hummed to life, he risked a small smile. "You ever ridden public transport before?" Her lips twitched, something close to amusement. "Only as cargo." The humor was dry, fragile, but real. He laughed once, quietly. "Well, tonight you get a window seat." When the pod doors sealed, she touched the tag still flickering faintly beneath his coat. "It's transmitting," she murmured. "They'll trace it." Orin reached, ripped the tag off with one quick motion, and threw it into the disposal chute. Sparks hissed. "Then let them follow garbage." She looked at him, startled. "You're not afraid?" He leaned back, exhaustion softening his voice. "I've lived afraid. It never helped." The city's neon blurred through the window. For the first time, her posture eased. She studied his reflection, cautious but curious. "You could have walked away." "I know," he said simply. "But I didn't." Outside, the rain began to fall, gentle, cleansing, almost kind. Somewhere behind them, alarms finally started to sound, distant and too late. By the time they reached the outer district, the city had changed character. The spotless towers gave way to older blocks, where screens flickered and people stopped pretending perfection was normal. Orin led Lyra down a narrow street toward a capsule hotel, the kind used by night shift workers. Its neon sign buzzed in protest, half of its letters dead. Inside, he paid in cash, no digital record. The clerk barely looked up. To him, they were just another tired pair avoiding the rain. When the capsule door slid shut, silence wrapped around them. Lyra stood stiffly near the wall, still in his coat. Her eyes traced every corner like someone who'd learned to expect cages. Orin sat opposite her. "You're safe here." For tonight, she didn't answer immediately. Instead, she peeled the damp hair off her neck and stared at her reflection in the metal wall. "Safe is temporary," she said softly. "They won't want this to be seen," he sighed. "I'll deal with it in the morning." Her gaze flicked toward him, sharp. "You talk like a soldier. You've dealt with worse." He hesitated, caught off guard by the accuracy. "Used to be one," he admitted. "Long time ago." "That explains it," she murmured. Before he could ask what she meant, the building lights dimmed. A soft pulse of static ran through the air. Lyra straightened instantly. "They're scanning," she whispered. Orin checked the control panel. "No network signal." The power grid was fine. The blackout was targeted. He grabbed his handheld scanner from his bag, an old military tool he shouldn't still own. The display flashed surveillance sweep detected. Lyra's breathing quickened. "They found us." "Maybe," he said, voice steady but eyes alert. "Or maybe they're just guessing." She took a small step closer, voice low. "You shouldn't have interfered." Too late for that. He motioned toward the back exit. "Come on." They slipped into the alley behind the hotel, just as a black security drone hovered past the window, searching. Rain slicked the pavement, and neon reflections rippled under their feet. For the first time, Orin realized he wasn't just protecting her. He was being hunted because of her. And strangely, that thought didn't scare him. It made him feel alive. The following day arrived gray and heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Orin and Lyra hid in an abandoned tram station, the hum of old wires echoing through metal walls. She sat near a broken console, tracing its glowing circuits as if touching something alive again. "We can't keep running," she said quietly. "They'll rewrite the story before we can tell it." Orin looked up from the terminal he'd hacked open. "Then we tell it first." Her expression hardened. "You mean expose them?" He nodded. "Coldmart logs every sale on the CivicNet. If we access their archive, we can prove they classified a sentient being as meat." Lyra's jaw tightened. "And what happens to you after that?" "I stopped worrying about myself the minute I opened that freezer," he said. "This has to mean something." For a long moment she studied him like someone trying to decide if faith was possible again. Finally she stood. "Then we make them listen." They climbed up from the tram station into the city's central promenade. Towering holoads glimmered overhead, selling perfection to people too tired to notice their own reflection. Orin moved with military precision, his eyes scanning for security drones. Lyra, wrapped in a new coat, walked beside him with quiet determination. At the plaza's heart stood a broadcast terminal. Public, loud, impossible to ignore. Orin connected the data drive he'd stolen from the archives. Lights flickered. 1,000 screens began to glitch. Lyra stepped forward. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Yesterday I stood in a freezer labeled as food. I am not property. I am not data. I'm alive." Crowds stopped. Cameras turned. Somewhere above them, alarms flared. Security drones swarmed, sirens rising through the plaza. Orin pulled her back instinctively. "We need to move." But she shook her head. "No, if I run, I stay what they made me." For a heartbeat he hesitated. Then he stepped beside her, facing the drones. The feed broadcasted their faces across the city, one human, one alien, both defiant. "They wanted silence," Lyra said, meeting the camera lens. "So we spoke, The plaza erupted, not in applause but in awareness. The noise faded slowly, replaced by the low thrum of hover patrols circling above. The crowd scattered in waves, leaving behind only flashing lights and the hum of broken hollow screens. Oren's pulse was steady, too steady, the kind of calm that comes only after chaos. Lyra stood beside him, her chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. The drones had stopped recording. Someone had cut the live feed, but it was too late. The footage had already reached the city's network. "You did it," Oren said, his voice rough. "They can't hide it now." Lyra's eyes glimmered under the dim light. "Truth doesn't erase chains overnight," she murmured. "But at least people saw them." They moved through the empty plaza, avoiding the incoming sirens. When they reached a quiet alley, Oren exhaled deeply for the first time in hours. His coat was torn, and his hand still trembled from holding the broadcast console too long. Lyra noticed, gently taking the hand and lowering it. "You shake when it's over," she said softly. He gave a tired laugh. "Old habit. The body remembers fear, even when the mind pretends it doesn't." For the first time since the store, she smiled, a small, real curve of the lips. "Then maybe you're alive again." They found shelter in a run-down cafe, run by an old vendor who pretended not to recognize them. The man slid 2 cups of hot broth across the counter and said only, "For the brave ones." Steam rose between them, carrying the faint scent of spice and smoke. Lyra lifted her cup carefully, as if learning to hold warmth again. "You freed me," she said. "But that isn't the end, is it?" Oren shook his head. "Freedom isn't an ending. It's a start." Outside, digital billboards flickered. The Coldmart logo had vanished, replaced by a blank grey screen, a corporate silence that screamed louder than words. Lyra reached into her pocket, pulling out the broken tag. She placed it on the table between them. "Keep it," she said. "Proof that we were real." He stared at it, then at her. "What about you?" "I'll decide who I am next," she said simply. "No one gets to tag that." When dawn spilled through the cafe windows, they stood together in its glow. 2 people the world had tried to label, now undefined, unowned, and quietly unafraid.